As you all know, the United States is an incredibly ruthless great power. We don't teach that in school, but that's the way the world works. See it up with all this liberal ideology about how noble we are and so forth and so on. But you know better than to believe that, right? Shouldn't they have a Monroe Doctrine? What's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? They should want to push the Americans out beyond the first island chain to China. And he played kissy face with the Chinese, and he's talking about forming a nice trading alliance with the Chinese. And Trump told him in no uncertain terms that if you go too far down this road, I'll choke you to death, right? You just can't do that. He did not try to avoid that war. And the reason is they thought they could use economic sanctions to throttle the Russians, right?
Okay, so this one's wild. John Mearsheimer, one of the most brutally honest IR scholars alive, is about to explain exactly how American hegemony actually works. And I mean actually works, not the sanitized version they teach you in school. He's going to lay out why the US crushed 4 different countries that tried to become regional powers, why we're coming for China next, and here's the part that's going to make some people uncomfortable, why Trump's unilateralism is actually stupid from an empire management perspective. Like, Mearsheimer's not some leftist critic. He's a realist. He studies power. And what he's about to say is stuff that most politicians will never admit out loud. Watch how casually he talks about the US being incredibly ruthless and how we gussy it up with liberal ideology. This is the part they don't want you hearing. Let's get into it.
The US had become a regional hegemon for the first time in modern history. What is a regional hegemon? How did that happen? And why did that happen?
Yeah, my argument is, just to start, that you have to distinguish between a global hegemon and a regional hegemon. And there's no country in the world ever that could be a global hegemon. The planet's just too big, number one. And number two, there's just too much water. And projecting power across water is very difficult. So the ideal situation for any country is to be a regional hegemon. And there's only one regional hegemon in recorded history, and that's the United States of America. And our principal goal for much of our history was to achieve regional hegemony, and then to make sure that we kept it, and to make sure that there is no other regional hegemon on the planet. There were 4 potential regional hegemons in the 20th century: Imperial Germany, Imperial Japan, Nazi Germany, and the Soviet Union. We put all 4 of them on the scrap heap of history. And now there's one on the horizon. It's called China. And we have our gun sights on China. The Chinese wisely from their point of view, want to be a regional hegemon in East Asia. From our point of view, that's unacceptable. We're not going to let that happen. We're going to contain China. And that's going to be the principal source of conflict across the planet for the rest of this century. Now, Jennifer asked me, what exactly is a regional hegemon? A regional hegemon is a country that in its region of the world. That region could be Europe, it could be East Asia, it could be the Persian Gulf, right? You are the most powerful state in the region. First of all, you're the only great power. And as you all know, just talking about the United States, we're the only great power in the Western Hemisphere. And furthermore, you're in a situation where the difference between how much power you have and every other power in the region is so great that you can basically dictate what the other state's foreign policy is, right? And there are no other great powers in the Western Hemisphere. And there is no country in the Western Hemisphere that would violate the Monroe Doctrine. And that's a way of saying they understand full well that there are limits on what their foreign policy can be. And if they violate those limits, we will crush them. As you all know, the United States is an incredibly ruthless great power. We don't teach that in school, but that's the way the world works. We gussy it up with all this liberal ideology about how noble we are and so forth and so on. But you know better than to believe that, right? So in the Western Hemisphere, we have the Monroe Doctrine. And the Monroe Doctrine says that no country in this hemisphere is allowed to form a military alliance with a distant great power, nor is any country in this hemisphere allowed to invite a distant great power to put military forces in the Western Hemisphere. And many of us in the audience are old enough to remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Soviets put missiles in Cuba, and JFK told them that was categorically unacceptable. Those missiles had to be taken out. We do not tolerate that. That's the Monroe Doctrine. So a hegemon is by far the most powerful state in its region of the world. And the problem that a country like Imperial Germany has, which I told you before was a potential hegemon, is that in its region, it had other great powers like France, Britain, Russia, and so forth and so on, right? We have a very different situation here. Now you ask me, why do you want to be a regional hegemon? It's very simple. There is no way, no better way to maximize your security, to enhance your chances of survival than to be a regional hegemon. How many of you go to bed at night worrying about anybody in this hemisphere attacking us? The answer is nobody does. Who? You worry about Mexico, Guatemala, Canada? Are they going to attack us? No. And then on our eastern border and our western border, we have fish. Does it get any better than this? No, it doesn't get any better than this. You want to be a regional hegemon. This is my point to the Chinese. As I often say, if I were Xi Jinping's national security advisor, I'd tell him that we want to dominate East Asia. We want to drive the Americans out. We have a Monroe Doctrine. Why shouldn't they have a Monroe Doctrine? What's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? They should want to push the Americans out beyond the first island chain, then the second island chain. They should want to dominate East Asia. But we don't want them to do that, of course. We want to be the only regional hegemon on the planet. His point was that Mark Carney, after the big kerfuffle in Europe involving Greenland and the anger with Donald Trump, began to talk. Mark Carney, the prime minister in Canada, began to talk about the middle powers taking matters into their own hands, creating their own international institutions, fostering international law, and having a much bigger impact on the world stage. Okay, is that a fair representation of your question? Yeah. Let me just say what's going on, a little bit more about what's going on here. Trump is a unilateralist like we have never seen before. He hates multilateral institutions and the rules that go with those institutions, and he hates international law. He also hates domestic law. He hates the Constitution, right? But we're talking about IR, right? He hates international institutions because institutions are rules, and rules are used by the Lilliputians to tie down Gulliver, and that's no good for him. He wants to dominate. He wants to dominate. He wants to be free to make decisions. He doesn't want rules, laws, institutions getting in the way. So the word multilateralism is anathema to him. Now, this is a remarkably foolish policy from an American perspective. You want to understand, we created these institutions.
Dude, did you catch what he just said? We don't teach that in school, but that's the way the world works. Like, he just casually admitted that the entire American mythology, all the freedom and democracy rhetoric, is window dressing for raw imperial power. And he said it like it's the most obvious thing in the world, which it is, but most people with his credentials won't say it. Here's what's actually happening in this clip. Mearsheimer's explaining that the US achieved something no other country in history ever has: total regional dominance. And once you have that, you make damn sure nobody else gets it. So we crushed Imperial Germany, twice actually. We crushed Imperial Japan. We crushed Nazi Germany. We crushed the Soviet Union. 4 potential regional hegemons, all destroyed. And now China's trying, and we're going to try to crush them too. And look, I know some of you are thinking, well, yeah, we had to stop the Nazis. We had to stop Imperial Japan. Sure, but Mearsheimer's point is that we didn't do it because they were evil. We did it because they threatened to become regional hegemons. The ideology was secondary. The threat to our dominance was primary. That's how great powers actually think. It's not about morality. It's about power consolidation. Now here's where it gets really interesting. He's literally telling you that if he were advising Xi Jinping, he'd tell China to do exactly what we did: dominate their region, kick out external powers, establish a Monroe Doctrine for East Asia, because that's what any rational great power would do. But obviously, we're not going to let that happen. Not because China's authoritarian. We're perfectly fine with authoritarian regimes when they serve our interests, but because they're threatening our monopoly on regional hegemony. And this is the thing people don't get about US foreign policy. It's not about spreading democracy. It's not about human rights. It's about maintaining the only truly secure geopolitical position on the planet: total dominance of your region with no peer competitors. That's it. That's the whole game. Like, he even says it. We gussy it up with all this liberal ideology about how noble we are. The guy's a realist scholar at the University of Chicago. He's not some radical leftist. He's just describing how power actually works without the bullshit coding. And the establishment hates when people like him say this stuff out loud, because it ruins the narrative. So when you hear politicians talk about defending freedom abroad, or protecting democracy, or standing up to authoritarianism, just remember this clip. Remember Mearsheimer casually explaining that we're incredibly ruthless and we just don't teach that part in school. Because the second people understand that our foreign policy is about power consolidation and not moral missions, the whole justification for empire starts to crack. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about that.
Effective. You want to understand, we created these institutions, we wrote the rules, we wrote international law, and we wrote it in ways that played to our advantage. And every one of his predecessors understood the importance of these institutions and these laws. So he is an anomaly, and it's just an indicator of what a radical he is. Okay, but he is what he is. So Mark Carney says the United States is not going to do the job. Right? It's trashing institutions, not nourishing them or building them. So we middle powers should get together and build alternative institutions. We should have more sway. It's just not the way the world works. The great powers basically run the system. The great powers build institutions, whether you're China, Russia, or the United States. And the fact is that Canada just doesn't have the weight to really create institutions and act in an independent way that makes the United States unhappy. And you want to remember that Carney, shortly after he had this blowout with Trump, went to China. And he played kissy face with the Chinese, and he's talking about forming a nice trading alliance with the Chinese. And Trump told him in no uncertain terms that if you go too far down this road, I'll choke you to death, right? You just can't do that. And what you want to understand is the United States is an incredibly powerful country, not simply because of its military might, and in fact, I would argue mainly because of its economic might. I miss this one. Let me just tell you a quick story, which I think is very important and very relevant here. During the unipolar moment, when the liberal IR theorists were in charge, okay, they created this highly interdependent global economy. And the belief was that it would foster peace, love, and dope, because everybody would be hooked into this highly interdependent economy. We'd all be getting rich. We'd all be getting prosperous. Nobody would ever start a war. And it was one of the principal theories, this is economic interdependence theory, it was one of the principal theories that informed our thinking, US thinking, during the unipolar moment. Well, the unipolar moment went away. We moved into this multipolar world. And what you end up with is this tightly integrated network, economic network, this big web. And who's sitting at the middle of the web? Uncle Sam. And everybody else in a very important way is dependent on Uncle Sam. And Uncle Sam quickly comes to understand that economic leverage that it has can be used against every country on the planet. Just think about, I could go through this, I won't, chapter and verse. Just quickly, Ukraine, I could tell you a story. The Biden administration was enthusiastic about the Ukraine war. They did not try to avoid that war. And the reason is they thought they could use economic sanctions to throttle the Russians, right? Just Biden understood. Trump understands. We have tremendous leverage because we operate in this highly integrated world.
Okay, so here's what just happened. Mearsheimer gave you a masterclass in how American power actually functions. And then he accidentally explained why Trump's approach is idiotic for the empire itself. Listen to what he said at the end there. The US built this entire global economic system during the unipolar moment, the era after the Soviet Union collapsed, when we were the only superpower. And we built it specifically to lock other countries into dependence on us. We sit at the center of the web. Everyone else is connected to us. And that gives us massive economic leverage over literally every country on the planet. That system, that web of interdependence, we built that. We wrote the rules. We created the institutions. And we did it in ways that benefit us. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's Mearsheimer, a conventional IR scholar, just stating the mechanics of hegemony. And then Trump comes in and starts trashing those institutions. He hates multilateralism. He hates international law. He hates the rules-based order that we created to advantage ourselves. And Mearsheimer's point is, that's idiotic. Not because it's immoral, but because it's bad strategy. You don't destroy the tools of your own dominance. You use them. Now here's where I'll add something Mearsheimer doesn't say, but should be obvious. Who benefits when Trump weakens these institutions? Not American workers, not regular people. The people who benefit are the billionaires and corporations who don't want rules, who don't want constraints, who want maximum freedom to extract and exploit without any international accountability. Trump's not doing this because he's some genius strategist. He's doing it because it serves the interests of the oligarch class he represents. And the Mark Carney thing, where Canada tries to assert some independence, maybe build trade ties with China, and Trump immediately threatens to choke them to death, that's the mask-off moment. That's the Monroe Doctrine in action. That's what Mearsheimer means when he says we're incredibly ruthless. You're a middle power. You don't get to make independent decisions that we don't like. That's not how hegemony works. So to summarize, Mearsheimer just explained that US foreign policy is about power consolidation, not moral missions. He explained that we crushed 4 countries for trying to become regional hegemons, and we're coming for China next. He explained that we built a global economic system specifically to give us leverage over everyone else. And he explained that Trump is undermining that system in ways that weaken American dominance, not because Trump's anti-empire, but because he's too stupid and transactional to understand how empire actually functions. And the establishment can't stand when someone says this stuff out loud. Because once you hear it explained this clearly, you can't unhear it. If you found this valuable, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Blueprint, because this is what we do here. We cut through the narrative and show you how power actually works. Stay sharp. I'll see you in the next one.